introduce our first presentation by Sam Kim and Claire Schen. Sam Kim is a GIS and geospatial librarian at the University of Buffalo Libraries, whose work focuses on geospatial literacy, particularly of non-majors. And then Claire Schen is the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Research and Scholarship in Undergraduate Education and Associate Professor of History at the University of Buffalo. She is also published on social and religious history, along with more recently integrating digital storytelling in pedagogy. Great. So I see the slides being shared. So I'll turn things over to you, Sam and Claire.
All right. Awesome. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
So, hi everyone. Welcome to this presentation titled Mapping for Non-Majors, Spatial Literacy and Digital Humanities. Again, my name is Sam Kim. I go by the he, him pronouns.
Claire Schen, she, her.
All right. Next slide, please. So for this presentation, we will be walking everyone through the various steps taken by myself as the new GIS librarian, collaborating with history faculty in exploring spatial literacy for non-majors. This is starting from developing new connections to the eventual collaboration, the strengths that each collaborator brought to the project for, in this case, cholera in Buffalo, 1854. The challenges that were experienced by all parties involved is not just the students, but also us, the faculty and the librarian. And to cap it off, takeaways for any librarians or faculty that may be interested in scaling a similar project for their own disciplines. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right. So starting things off, as a new subject specialist, I'm relatively new to my position here at the University of Buffalo. I'm entering my third year. I struggled with the glaring question of how do I build meaningful connections, not collections, across disciplines when looking beyond physical geography. As a subject specialist, you often get kind of limited to or expected to be limited to your subject. And for something like spatial literacy or GIS in particular, there is a bit of a stigma for anyone that's not as well versed. Often it's associated with being data focused. And when you think of GIS, you might often think of geographers, environmental researchers, or data scientists, which for faculty that may work in the humanities, it can be a little more intimidating. So it's harder to get a bit of buy-in. On top of that, as the new librarian, I had to contend with the fact that I had pretty much no street cred at the University of Buffalo at that point. So I had to work on networking. It really helped that I could work with some of my peers that were a bit more established to kind of figure out who in the humanities might be a bit open to these sort of collaborative opportunities. And also, in my case, with Claire, as she still is a very proactive, pro-libraries faculty partner for trying new things with their curriculum. Next slide, please. So regarding what we brought respectively as a GIS librarian, I focused on my own strengths, which was just covering GIS as a concept, really emphasizing the differences between spatial and attribute data, as students likely were not aware of that. The biggest stress point was just being able to support these students with using Esri's ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS StoryMaps, since those were the primary platforms we were using for this project. And this was really important for scaffolding the primary source data into the online mapping component.
And I just want to give, to follow on from there, just a sense of the class itself. It's a class on plagues and pandemics, but it was designed to be built around some kind of collaborative project, research project for the students. In this case, we identified the cholera epidemic project. It's highly suitable, of course, to GIS because of the materials that we had. We had a small available archive, meaning one that the students could access. I tend for this class to choose topics that are based in local history and local sources. And importantly, It gives students an opportunity to write on a topic that has not been previously deeply researched. So primary sources, and then again, my mentorship, as well as Sam's involvement and mentorship, is extremely important. We're ready for the next slide. Thanks. All right, so you already know the topic was cholera in Buffalo in 1854. We had an anthropologist in Buffalo who had previously transcribed a manuscript register from the Department of Health on the 1854 cholera cases and deaths that included names, addresses, no house numbers in most cases, that wasn't common at the time, as well as institutions where people were sent when they were identified as having cholera. So GIS is a core objective in the class, the ability to learn how to use it, to have experience with it, along with StoryMaps. StoryMaps is a little difficult for a collaborative project because of the danger of overwriting each other. So that takes some coordination in the class, but it certainly isn't impossible. So this was a chance in this class to use these new tools in a relatively safe space of a collaborative project with the help of a librarian and the presence of the faculty member in the classroom. I carve out classroom time for this, and Sam has always been very flexible about coming in to visit with us and do troubleshooting in the context of the class. We even discovered through the process of this that even using Excel was usually new for the students. Next slide, please. So you get a sense here from the pre-survey, some of the self-reported prior experience. So on the left side, that green part of the pie shows that students who said they had no prior research experience in college. The blue part of it means that they had taken a seminar class and done some kind of research. And then the orange part signified that they had done a group project of some sort in the context of a class based on some original sources. On the right side, this is especially important for us. You can see the great big blue part shows that for most students, they had presented any kind of research only through a very traditional written paper. Many of my students still write these. I'm not against them, but it was interesting to see how few of them had been engaged in an alternative mode, whether a podcast or video, a digital platform. I wish I had been a little more specific with them to see if they had used PowerPoint, because I think sometimes that's the kind of electronic mode that a lot of people are using. So if you go to the next slide, and I'll pass this off to Sam.
Right. On this screen, I'm going to describe the image. So on the screen is the Dr. James Newman's cholera register, or at least some of it, from 1854, where it highlights various names, information actually of the various cases from that epidemic, includes names, locations, mainly the place of residence or where the patient ended up was picked up because they were incapacitated. It could have been on a street corner. There was no address. And then some notes that were also included regarding either the patient, whether the symptoms or anything else. So in this slide, we really just wanted to emphasize that some of the challenges that we encountered that actually can be seen on just from this image. Some of the issues that the students really faced were the messy historical records, as I described before. Some of the cases that were documented used imprecise locations, because if you were incapacitated, you got picked up and dropped off at a sick house or anything, what was listed was the street name. So Seneca Street, Main Street is not very precise because those locations can span miles. And that was rather problematic for mapping, since students had to figure out how to convert that into one point, a single point. But in addition to that, there was also the fact the students had to contend with locations that may have been lost with time. Between 1854 and today, a lot has changed in Buffalo, mainly in the 1950s, where there was a lot of construction that changed the shape of many neighborhoods. So students had to struggle with converting any locations that were from the 1850s to modern projections that were often quite problematic. And then on top of that, there was the information overload when you're going from converting this manuscript into spreadsheet to eventually be mapped out. Next slide, please. Regarding some of the outcomes, for spatial literacy, students did benefit from gaining experience regarding using GIS tools. They were able to develop hands-on experience since almost all of the instruction was carried out as a hands-on workshop. So we worked with students with georeferencing historic maps to aid in mapping out the cases. And this was based off of whatever data was available from the spreadsheets that we all worked on together that combined GPS coordinates that we kind of pulled from Google Maps that were extrapolated from any of the locations that we found from Newman's manuscripts. And the final product ended up being students used StoryMaps, since that coupled the multimedia that was used, whether it be scans of the original register, as well as any mapping components that we developed, and there were several. Next slide, please.
So part of setting up this project, besides working with Sam to develop the GIS aspects of this and understand the scope of that, I was also working with the curator and the librarian of the History of Medicine collection at UB as well, and also was trying to think a little more systematically, because this was sort of the second time with this class, about gathering some information from students along the way. So you've already seen the pre-survey. There was also a midpoint survey. And then at the end of it, they do peer and self-evaluations about their contributions, and they write student reflections about what they thought of the project. So what's outlined here are really some of the main themes out of that. So in the first place, thinking about challenges. Students described the research as, quote, long and strenuous, but it wasn't bad, right? Because also they use words like fun. I really enjoyed it as part of their reflection on what they had gained from this particular project. They did find collaboration hard. In fact, that was something that was often seemed to be a source of anxiety for the students, is what was it going to be like to rely on other people, especially knowing that this was going to become something of a public document. And in fact, we did publish to the world after discussing it in the context of the class. Now, I will also say their sense of achievement was actually palpable. It took a long time, given the challenges that Sam outlined, to finally be able to see the map unfold. And when they saw that in class, they actually clapped, and there was a little bit of whooping, which was really, I felt the same, right? But it was really gratifying to see them take such pride and actually joy out of the work they had done as well. They also learned a lot about being much more careful and attentive to detail. You know, as a humanist and history professor, we do close reading of sources, and it is actually I find it still a very challenging skill for students to fully develop as undergraduates. It's always something that they're honing. I mean, we always do this as well in the rest of our careers. But it was a really great experience for them to see this themselves in order to realize how important that was. One student, in fact, described going off on a terrible tangent based on a misreading that actually kind of embarrassed him, but he reflected on what he had learned from that. So it's good to have a chance to learn from mistakes as well. In terms of critical thinking and historical research, they loved the hands-on aspects of this. They even had a lot of ideas about if only we'd had more time, we could have done so much more with the project, which is really wonderful, right? I could tell that they were curious. Students described this project as unique and fresh and a really, quote, creative way to learn. In terms of creative research, there was no simple or direct resource for some of the information that they needed. It was not prepackaged material. That too is very important for students to experience as historians, because that is part of a research project and process, no matter what your field is, that you're going to think, I need a little more information. Where am I going to find it? And I want to finish with a sense of how the students developed a greater sense of place, an attention to the city of Buffalo itself, as well as some empathy for these people in the past. Students described what an amazing time, that's a quotation, this was in terms of the immigration and the growth of Buffalo in the 19th century. They also expressed feeling actually closer to the people who had lived through this epidemic. And we don't need to go into the details of cholera for me to tell you it's terrible, right? So they really did feel a sense of empathy for the experience. I think that makes a really nice connection with Sam's opening point about that stigma about a data focus, because even in my field, sometimes people worry that focusing on GIS kind of removes the people from the story. For the students, it was really quite different. It was a kind of imaginative walking through the city. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sam, and we can move to the next slide.
All right, thank you, Claire. So this is nearing the end of the presentation, but just some takeaways regarding scaling the spatial literacy across disciplines. My recommendations as a new librarian that's gone through this process, the first and foremost is find a faculty champion. Does not have to be a direct faculty member. You could work through back channels or through your peers. I am still the geography librarian, but I worked with our anthropology librarians to identify any other interested faculty members that are not focused in STEM or with a heavy data background that may have been interested in this, which resulted in the collaboration with Claire. And the main goal is just to get that one successful, tangible project, because that works really well in terms of visualizing what you can do with it and marketing it to other faculty across other departments, which I was able to leverage for our occupational therapy departments here at UB, and they're trying to map out pretty much their student portfolios regarding their work across the Buffalo area at various clinical locations. Location helps a lot, especially when you're working with students that have had a longer tenure in the area, like upper undergrads. They've been in the area for a while, so they are a bit more familiar, and they can rely on that area of local familiarity to kind of carry them through the otherwise abstract concepts that are GIS or spatial literacy. For scaffolding, a very important assumption is to never make the assumption that everyone knows everything. It really helps to guide especially for non-technical students through the earliest phases. Like for example, with the history students, a really important part was addressing the fact that some of them weren't as comfortable with things like Excel. So focusing on that early on so that later on, when everything became a bit more complex, they still had that, they had the confidence from the initial foundational information. My favorite part of scaling this is embracing chaos. Data isn't perfect, which is why there's a whole issue of tidying data. But it's important to embrace those imperfections because they work as a great springboard and testbed for problem solving and guiding critical literacy, critical thinking among students. It also acts as a freebie for engagement because it will incentivize inquiry from the students to engage with the messy data. They'll ask you questions because they'll come across their own issues. Pro tip would be make sure to rehearse whatever chaos that you can so that you aren't completely blindsided live. But if you can't, lean into it whenever you can. And of course, new presentation media is always a boon since, writing research papers constantly can be a drag for students, and just having something a new tool to work with or play with always helps with retention of some of these skills and with keeping students focused on the task. And next slide, please. So thank you everyone for viewing this presentation. On screen is a QR code for the story maps that we developed. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do this, but there's also a hyperlink in the slide. I'll just do it to send to everyone, and a link to, I can share a link to the story maps. But when you watch the recording, you can just scan the QR code and it'll take you to the story maps that we published publicly regarding the project.
Thanks very much.